was proven to be telling the truth, and they were proven to be liars. Once again, that will happen. When I testify, you'll get the whole story, and it will be definitively clear that what I said was true, and that whatever happened to them, which is, it's unfortunate if other people overreacted, but everything I said about them is true.
That's a crazy thing to say after being found liable for defamation. But one thing he said in that little interview was, when I testify, you will get the whole story. But that testimony will not be coming because today Rudy Giuliani's lawyer announced he will not be testifying in the damages trial for his defamation case. In fact, the jury is already deliberating on how much money former New York City mayor and longtime Trump ally Rudy Giuliani is gonna have to pay out to the 2 election workers who he defamed. Now, instead of allowing his client to testify, Giuliani's attorney, Joseph Sibley, went straight into his closing arguments. Partially said, Giuliani lawyer Joseph Sibley began his closing argument. He quickly acknowledged that my client has committed wrongful conduct against the plaintiffs. He also suggested Giuliani decided not to testify because we feel like these women have been through enough, while accepting that these women have been harmed. Sibley said the amount they're seeking in damages is too high. We'll get into a little bit why I actually think he chose not to testify today and the implications it could have had on his criminal trials. But the idea that Rudy Giuliani cares about the harm he's caused to these women when he continued to spout those lies outside of the damages trial all throughout this week is absolutely absurd. So I do just want to remind everyone though that this trial was just a trial for damages. As I mentioned, Rudy Giuliani has already been found liable for defaming the 2 election workers in a default judgment. So before we get into what Giuliani might have to pay them, and it's quite a lot, apparently so much that it might kill him, according to his attorney. Let's talk about how he defamed these women and the massive impact that it had on their lives. Now, the plaintiffs in this case are Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, who are a mother and daughter who were serving as election workers in Georgia during the 2020 election. A little more on that from NPR. Giuliani had targeted the 2 women as President Donald Trump and his allies spread the lie that the 2020 election was stolen. As part of the campaign in Georgia, Giuliani, Trump, and others made Moss and Freeman the targets of debunked fraud claims. One of Giuliani's false accusations included a claim that Moss handed her mother a thumb drive, quote, like they were vials of heroin or cocaine, as the 2 worked at the State Farm Arena for the Fulton County Board of Elections in 2020. In reality, Moss has said her mother had just handed her a ginger mint, which was what happened. I feel like it's important to note because Rudy Giuliani was describing it as though they were passing drugs to each other. The 2 women are black, and there was definitely racist implications behind what he was saying. Now, and of course, all of the accusations Giuliani made about the women were not true, but that didn't prevent the severe harassment the women faced from happening. So a little more on that from CNN. But those claims led to a deluge of threats and harassment on social media through voicemails and in person against Moss and Freeman. The attorney played haunting voicemails the plaintiffs received in which they were called racial slurs and other insults. Some of the messages contained death threats. Have a nice life. What's left of it, one person said in an audio clip played Monday. Now, they mentioned the women were also harassed in person. Angry Trump supporters showed up to their houses so frequently that they had to move. They also had to leave their jobs, and finding new employment proved to be very difficult for them given the damage to their names and reputations. In fact, one of the women during a job interview, the interviewer pulled up an article on his phone that mentioned the accusations of Rudy Giuliani and asked her if she was the person who tried to steal the election. She just had to walk out of that job interview. But despite the fact that Rudy Giuliani's defamatory lies effectively ruin these women's lives, he and his attorneys would have you believe that he's the real victim here. And despite already being liable for defamation, he just couldn't control himself from continuing to defame these women outside of the courthouse on the first and every subsequent day, except for today, of this trial. Take a look.
Do you regret what you did to Ruby?
Of course I don't regret it. I told the truth. They were engaged in changing votes.
There's no proof of that.
Oh, you're damn right there is. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned, he says, although he did not testify in this damages trial, and him and his attorneys completely, prevented a trial from happening in the first case by undermining the procedural rights that these women had by interfering with the discovery process. Now, to the potential damages, which we might hear tomorrow from the jury, Freeman and Moss are seeking between $15 and $43 million in compensatory and punitive damages from Giuliani, which his attorney claimed would be a, quote, death sentence for Rudy. Said this in court: if you award them what they are asking for, it will be the end of Mr. Giuliani, to which I would say, good. Good. And we know that Rudy Giuliani is pretty much flat broke at this point, but he ruined these women's lives and they deserve this type of compensation. Jake, what are your thoughts on this trial? Maybe the implications that testifying would have had for Rudy Giuliani in the criminal trial?
Yeah, so before we get to that, I think there's three things that are both important and hilarious here. So number one, just like Donald Trump, Giuliani said, I will not cower. I'm gonna go and testify. And they're like, okay, it's your turn to testify, Mr. Giuliani. Oh no, I can't do that. And wait a minute, your attorney's saying it's a death sentence for you if you lose this case. And you claim you have this amazing, overwhelming evidence, but you're not gonna show it in court? Which leads to point number two. No, for the billionth time in a row, hey MAGA, look, it's gonna bankrupt him. This is devastating. His life is over, his attorney is saying, and yet they did not present one piece of evidence that the election was stolen or that these allegations in particular were true. You know why? Because they don't have any evidence, which leads to the hilarious third point. The quotes from the Giuliani's own lawyer are hilarious. She compared him to a flat earther. And by the way, hey MAGA, his own lawyer says, cuckoo, flat earther. There's no evidence of a stolen election at all. Cuckoo. So what happened? I thought you guys had all the evidence. Where's the mules? Where's the Kraken? Anyway, then she says, I know that some of you may not think that he hasn't exactly helped himself with some of the things that have happened in the last few days. So admitting right there, like, yeah, my client's a clown, and you guys have seen it over the last couple of days. And I can't really deny that. My defense sucks. I'm doing the best I can here. They continued, my client has committed wrongful conduct. We feel like these women have been through enough. These are all direct quotes. These women have been harmed. Okay, I'm like, where are we gonna get to the defense? And then they say, you should have been better. This is what Sibley, the lawyer for Giuliani, is saying to the jury in the closing arguments about Giuliani. You should have been better, but you're not as bad as the plaintiffs are making you out to be. That's the message that they want the jury to deliver to Giuliani. You're a terrible person, and we've seen you be a clown in these last couple of days, and you've done some awful things, but you're not quite as awful as they say you are. Wow. That is a riveting defense. I didn't know you had all those Krakens, Rudy. Well, no wonder you were telling everybody, oh, you better wait till closing arguments, and then by the end of this trial, you'll see. Well, we did see, Rudy. We definitely saw.
I think it's really interesting, and I would like to have been a fly on the wall in these meetings that happened today that led to Rudy Giuliani not testifying because they had definitely been laying the groundwork that he would testify. But also today, as I mentioned, was the only day he didn't stop and talk to the press outside of the courtroom, which was so out of character for him that it was literally an update on the site that I was tracking, because I was wondering if they would return a verdict before we went live and wanted to be able to cover that. So I was routinely refreshing the page to see these updates, and they're like, Rudy Giuliani left the courthouse with his head down and did not speak to any of the press. I would just love to know what was said to him to actually get him to do something that was probably good for him moving forward. Because I was saying, if he testified today, they could use that in his criminal trials that are coming up in Georgia for election fraud and all of those charges. But I mean, I haven't seen him do anything that I think would serve a sense of self-preservation. He's continued to espouse these lies that it's damaging to him. He's not been, like some of the other co-conspirators, been taking these plea deals, although maybe he's such a big fish and such a big player that they wouldn't offer one to him. But he's got so much inside information, I can't imagine they wouldn't want to try to get him to sell out Trump. But I mean, this is a man who has demonstrably not acted in his self-interest. What on God's green earth led him to do so today?
Yeah, so first, a quick correction on my part. I said his lawyer is actually Joseph Sibley. Secondly, I love the defense that MAGA can do here. They're like, well, he didn't want to testify in this trial, which is going to bankrupt him and ruin his life, because he doesn't want to incriminate himself in the criminal trial. Do you know that you're telling on yourself? That means that in the criminal trial, if he talked at all, he would incriminate himself, because they don't have any evidence of a stolen election. They were the ones trying to steal the election. I'm sure that no one in MAGA knows this, because no one in right-wing media is honest, so they've never talked about this. So Donald Trump and his allies lost 60 court cases in a row. They never presented one piece of evidence that the election was stolen, because they didn't have one piece of evidence, and they never have, right? So a lot of you might know that. But in one of the cases, the judge directly asked Rudy Giuliani, "Sir, do you have any evidence to offer the court?" And he said, "No, we have no evidence."
Amazing, amazing. But maybe tomorrow we'll have some news on how much he's going to owe these women, because it's not going to be $0. It's going to be in the multi-millions of dollars.
Yeah, that closing testimony or closing statement was one of the funniest I've ever seen. Look, my client, I gotta be honest with you, dirtbag. And I can't hide it, because you all saw it with your own eyes. One of the worst guys around. He's such a dirtbag, dirt drips from his head, okay? And he's just an awful, miserable person who just lied about these poor women. My heart breaks for these women. But could you just please not, punish him too much, okay? I know I can't ask you not to punish him severely, but just maybe leave a couple of bucks left, okay? Well, that about sums up the MAGA case, doesn't it?
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members, because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us. Become a Young Turk.